So this session is and I appreciate Scott's technical support here getting going, but this is what is it, scientifically speaking? Scientifically speaking, that's it, right. So hopefully I will actually be able to speak for the next 45 minutes or so. My voice is starting to go. I'm going to move to the microphone as soon as he's,
and you should be able to just click and go, I think.
Yep, okay, great, okay.
Can you lower that screen?
The one behind, right here? Yeah, where, do you know how to do that?
It doesn't come down. No.
Bummer, yeah, wow. So here we go. Yeah, leave no trace, scientifically speaking. So I expect that some of you have probably seen the Jeff Marion generated slides at one time or another that talk about his research. Is that an accurate statement? I know yes, right? Yes. We usually present those at least at level 2 master educator courses, and sometimes some of it's covered at level 1 courses. So is there anybody who has not seen those recreation ecology slides, kind of about Jeff Marion's research? Yeah, I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but I'm not going to, this is not a Jeff Marion research. Each of our conferences and some of the other national conferences and things like that, he does a presentation like this. He talks about his research on recreation ecology, and basically every 2 years you get kind of an update of the stuff he's been doing the last couple of years. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Some of you may have also seen the Leave No Trace Center, and I'll get here in a minute, but the Leave No Trace Center has also really tried to broaden their work on their science work on the social science. And there's a presentation we have now that talks about that work, the human dimensions, basically why do people's behavior change or not in response to a given, so we'll talk about that too, but I'm not going through that presentation either. I just want to kind of lay the groundwork here about, and what I would like to do though is try to talk about my understanding of what is going on in the Leave No Trace research and science world. We are a small enough group here. I have a few slides that actually have questions on them. So as we're talking, please feel free to weigh in and talk. Again, especially it'll give me a chance to take a drink and get my throat working again. So here we go, we'll get started. Leave no trace, scientifically speaking. I put a couple of little, if you ask an 8-year-old about what's science, they may think about the stuff we are thinking about, right? But they're probably thinking about maybe chemistry labs and stuff like that, lab coats. But to me, we've had this STEM program in scouting, science. And a lot of that was about lab coats and chemistry and, technology. But to me, the scouting brand is about being outdoors and nature, and there's a lot of science there. So we talked about conservation, who was in the conservation, DCSA? I guess nobody's in here. Yeah, you were in there, right, yeah. So yeah, we were talking, there's a lot of science, and just what we just heard from Lee, all that, they're not just going in and cutting down trees, right? There's a lot of science there, figuring out what trees to cut, and all the natural communities and all that good stuff. So hydrology, so pretty exciting. I get really excited about this stuff, so anyway. But we always need to start with a safety moment, and I kind of didn't think about this, that he was going to talk about all the Philmont fires, but here we go, safety moment. I don't think any of this is surprises to any of us, but they always ask us to do the safety moments. So here we go, follow local campfire regulations or requirements, be aware of current fire conditions, use an established campfire ring. Additives to the fire are prohibited, so that's a BSA regulation. All those chemical things to get your fire to start easier, actually prohibited. I know that is not a prohibition that is always followed, but never leave a campfire unattended. Always have a shovel, rake, and water handy if you have water around. It actually says something like water or a substitute for trying to stop the fire. And extinguish your campfires properly. So again, no surprises there, but that the link to the safety moment is down there, pretty easy to find on the Safety Moment website. So I went on the Leave No Trace website and searched for science, and there's like 2 or 3 things popped up, and I'm like, that's weird. Because I think their searches, anyway, it didn't work as I expected, so I typed in research, and that was exciting because it came up with this big page with all this great stuff. And I put this link here, and this page, if you have not looked, because Leave No Trace goes and they like reorganize their website every few years, and anyway, sometimes it makes it hard to find things, especially if you finally figured out where things are, then they reorganize it all. But this page, the Our Work Research, is great if you want to understand what they are thinking about and what is going on with Leave No Trace, both within the organization, but also their science partners. So I know this text is going to be hard to read, so I kind of blew up the kind of key points. And I think many of you have heard this before. The Leave No Trace is grounded in science and research. Very important. And this is what I was alluding to before. There are origins in the recreation ecology. And again, that's the material that Dr. Jeff Marion, longtime scouter and active member of this community, has been doing that work for decades. He actually just retired, last year, but he's been doing it from, graduate school all the way through. So, 40 some years, one of the real pioneers, but also a really active scouter. So it's been a great benefit to have, for us as an organization, to have access to that. But, so we'll talk about recreation ecology and what that is in a couple of minutes. But as I mentioned, Leave No Trace is also paying attention to what we're calling human dimensions. Not just what are the impacts, but why do people make the decisions they make, and why do they make the choices they make? Why do they decide to throw that piece of trash on the ground? Or why do they decide if they see a piece of trash that they stop and pick it up? Or fires, or all the other things we talk about in Leave No Trace. So again, we'll go into more detail on that. So, and this is just really showing that I thought one of the things that really came across to me is these research areas over the recent time have been kind of bifurcated, running separately and developing separately, but they're really starting to converge again. So not only thinking just about the environmental behavior or the conservation behavior of people, but also what behavior they have, and then how does that have what impacts does that have? And then and we've talked about this in Leave No Trace before in our Leave No Trace conversations. How does that in turn feed back into that behavior? So if somebody sees a place that has a lot of trash, or where there's been a big fire scar, that big fire pit we have in some of our council scout camps, and they're like, oh, it's okay to build a big fire because that's what everybody else does, and norms and things like that. So anyway, I guess I wanted to just call attention again these 2 different areas, but again they seem to be starting to really feed back into each other. So let's kind of step back a little bit. Why science? Why is it important for Leave No Trace to be based in science?
There's some expectation that you have a basis for what you're teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So, cat hole, we have a dimension, we have a depth based on science, on, how deep does it need to be and what type of terrain to decompose what's in the hole.
Right. It's just not like Dave's opinion, Anything else? Any other reasons why?
Get better results.
Yep. Say that again?
Provides a metric by which it's universally accepted that there's a relationship between cause and
Right.
and it makes it easier to communicate that to the community.
Right, sure. And we can actually measure things and then evaluate whether what we're doing is actually working, and then make adjustments, et cetera, right?
Figure out the best practices.
Yeah, in the best practices, exactly, right, yeah, yeah. Say that again, Mark? Oh, okay. You're both at the same time. You're on the same page thinking. Okay. So here's those other 3 bullets that I pulled out were all in these first couple of sentences, but now this is that's the latter part. And so why science? We're striving to understand how and why humans cause impacts, and how do we influence behaviors to decrease recreational related impacts. So it's not just about understanding what impacts, which is really what recreational ecology is about. You know, if a scout troop of 50 people walks along this, walks through this meadow and packs down all the vegetation, what's going to happen? That's the recreational ecology piece. Or if somebody digs a cat hole and poops in it, how long is it going to take to decompose? That's the recreational ecology piece. But now this other piece is, again, about how do people make decisions? Why do they make those decisions? What choices do they make and why? But I want to focus a little bit on this, influencing behavior. Influencing behavior. Do any of you like it when somebody tells you what to do? I guess it depends. I mean, my wife tells me what to do, and sometimes I do it because I want her to be happy, and she's usually right about what I should be doing anyway. So it's nice that she tells me what to do, because then I don't have to think for myself. But a lot of times, you kind of want to have some freedom and be able to do what you want to do, right? And not have somebody to tell you what to do all the time. So let's think about this. We talk about outdoor ethics, and we tell people this is a choice, right? We're not telling you you must dig a cat hole. You can't build a fire, right? We're not it's not a command, right? It's not a rule, it's an ethic. So it's about choices, not about rules. So, right and wrong, and then individual choices, and especially in scouting, we frequently have to make group decisions too, and I think that's a big part of why Leave No Trace is valuable in scouting. So, the patrol leader, the senior patrol leader needs to, work with the scouts and figure out where are we going to set up our tents, and yeah, it might be easier to set up the tents over here, and it looks like it's going to be a really nice spot, but maybe it's not really the best. It might be the most comfortable spot to sleep, but it might not be the best spot for the environment, right? It may not, or wildlife, right? Maybe preventing wildlife from accessing the stream or something like that. So, or the scouts really want to make a big fire, but somebody needs to kind of figure out how are we, is that the right thing to do as a group? So there are also trade-offs too. What are some trade-offs we have in Leave No Trace in terms of decisions we would need to make? Between the different principles. Yeah. So you said safety? Yeah, safety is absolutely right. It's maybe you need to make sure the thing you are doing may cause more impact, but there's a reason for it. Yeah, good point. Yeah. Any other Leave No Trace trade-offs you can think of?
Take the already impacted site close to the stream, or you pick something away from the stream.
Right, sure, and cause more impact over there. Right, sure. One of the classic ones I always, talk about with scouts is we tell you, they'll, stay on the durable path when we're hiking. But then the scout says, oh, I need to go to the bathroom. What do I do? What do we tell them to do? Walk 200 feet off the path. Just, we get the second principle, stay on the durable path, right? And then we say, oh, well, walk 200 feet off the path. It's wait, hold it. It's confusing, right? So, but that's the reality, right? It's about choices and understanding and thinking about that. And so is it even right for us to, going back to that point about influencing behavior, if it's about people's choices, isn't it their choice? We're in America, right? Where's freedom, we can make our own choices. But is that manipulative to try to tell somebody, well, it's really your choice what you can do, but by the way, this is actually the right choice. That doesn't feel like it's really a choice, is it? So anyway, something to think about. Something to think about. And that is I'd say an active conversation. There's conservation psychology and environmental behavior. There are researchers who pay attention to this stuff. And that's something that that's an active conversation. So anyway, but I also wanted to bring this in. I think some of you have probably seen this before. I expect all of you have probably seen this before one time or another. But ethical decisions, right? Ethical choices. And that's why, to me, bringing this back, why science and, making these, to me, it's about making informed choices. We're not telling you what to do, but if you want to do the right thing and you just don't know, we're giving you information so you can make a better decision. And,
Science is the big why we do what we do.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. And especially for younger scouts, they may not know what the best choice is, or at least what the choice that will have less impact on a thing that they hopefully care about. And that again comes to that feedback loop, right? If they're realizing what impacts are and aware of them, then kind of comes back around to what choices am I going to make. So it's both understanding what the recreational ecology is and understanding the human dimension of it. And obviously we're not going to go into, that kind of conversation with a 9-year-old probably, but that's the basis of that. And coming back to the idea of how science all kind of ties this together. So recreational ecology, again, I'm not going to go through the 49 slide Jeff Marion recreational ecology with all the graphs and moving and all of that stuff. But I would say if you have not seen that, I encourage you to look at it. I don't know if you can see this down here, but the links are there, so you'll be able to, when you get these PowerPoints, you'll be able to go and click through and go directly and download that most current version of that presentation. So, but recreational ecology, what are some of the things that when we're talking about Leave No Trace, what are some of those impacts that where science and research where we've used science and research to try to understand the impacts and if we look at this, the principles of Leave No Trace. There's some clues up here on these little, cute cartoon. Durable surfaces, yeah. What do you mean, Mark? Like, what would be like understanding that?
How durable are different durable surfaces, grasses versus forests, and Jeff, back to the kinds of things that Jeff makes a big emphasis on.
Right, yeah, different vegetation, and if they're, how much impact can they take? Are they resilient? Are they et cetera, right? Are they going to recover? Okay, so yeah, durable surfaces. Any other research that fits into this recreational ecology bucket? Once again, some clues up there.
Campfires again.
Campfires, right, campfire impacts, So what happens to the soil? What happens when we're withdrawing organic material, the branches and stuff, and burning it? What's air pollution? There's a lot of things related to fire. And we just heard a lot again from Lee about the ecological impacts of impacts to not only to that immediate area, but also in those large-scale fires, kind of a much more substantial impact. So, anything else?
How humans impact animals and habitats.
Right, the wildlife and habitats, right, in interaction with wildlife in both the our impacts on the wildlife and their habitat, and then their impacts on us, right? Where if you leave your food in a place and then they come and steal your food, right, or something. So anyway, there's a lot of research that has occurred there, and it's continuing, but this is one of the reasons why Leave No Traces broadened their focus, is because a lot of those things are fairly well understood. There's still additional research, like, we've figured out how long it takes, human fecal matter to decompose in this type of soil with this much precipitation and blah, 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 blah. So we're going to go to one where there's 12% more precipitation. And, it's like kind of incremental now. But this human dimension, this is a really rich area now. And so the kind of the research questions are formed as kind of measuring the actual behaviors of people, and then understanding whether there is a behavior change or not based on what's called an intervention. So we'll talk about interventions here. Does any of that sound familiar? If you looked at the presentation from Leave No Trace on this stuff, it kind of gives some groundwork. But just again, some more links here. So this is the Leave No Trace Strategic Research Agenda. This sounds pretty, I don't know, what's a good word? I don't want to say pretentious, but it sounds kind of pretentious, Strategic Research Agenda. But anyway, it's a 5-year plan of the different work that they're doing. If you go to this page, in addition to seeing the actual agenda where it's describing the different work areas, they also there's about 12 or 15 scientists who are now teaming with Leave No Trace. Some academic folks, university affiliation. Some are more with, government agencies. But basically they're trying to say, it's not just within the Leave No Trace organization, but trying to coordinate a research agenda on these across these different researchers at different institutions. So we don't have, 10 people all working to try to understand one problem and nobody trying to understand this other thing over here. But some of you may have heard of this, theory of planned behavior. Does that sound familiar? We're kind of down in the weeds here a little bit, but that's something, if you're interested, you can check out. And so it was kind of originally come up, this is not specific to recreation and Leave No Trace, but basically it's been these longer term theories. And you see that's from 1985, but it's actually based on earlier work from, decades old, about what is someone's attitude. What do they, do they want to do the right thing, or do they not care? Are they comfortable with just doing something illegal or whatever? And then what are their kind of expectations and intentions? And then also what are the kind of the norms, and what's kind of society? How do they perceive what is normal behavior or accepted behavior? And so based on those things, people say okay, based on if I integrate those things, those three things, then I'm going to have an intention, a planned behavior, and then maybe, or will I actually be able to execute on that behavior? Will I actually do what I intended to do? And so anyway, that's this 1985. This is the 2019, this guy, and you can Google for this and it will pop up. But anyway, you can see 2019 is pretty recent. There's still kind of, like a lot of these theories, people try to understand them. Is it working as we expected, et cetera? So that this second paper from 2019 talks about how valid is this theory, basically. And the reason I put this in is because it's theory of planned behavior, but what we actually really care about is the actual behavior. right? Just because I feel like I'm going to get up this morning and I'm going to exercise and I'm going to eat a healthy breakfast and I'm going to get, everything done on my to-do list today, that's my planned behavior. But yeah, my actual behavior might be, oh yeah, well that YouTube video, I might, go and, right? So anyway, that's kind of how this theory has evolved, but that's really what the Leave No Trace folks are trying to, work with on, again, people's decision-making processes. And then again, this is kind of a survey paper. This one, again, easy to find. Just Google for that. And this is talking about this idea of environmental behavior, right? Pro-environmental behavior, which is a broader category, not just leave no trace and kind of your recreational decisions, but more, do you recycle stuff? And do you, walk to the grocery store when it's close by, or do you get into your car and drive 2 blocks to the grocery store, or whatever? But it does encompass also our recreational activities too. So anyway, that's kind of kind of how these science questions, research questions are framed for in the context of Leave No Trace. So intervention. Does anybody, have you heard of that before? What's an intervention?
Signage at a trailhead.
Signage at a trailhead. That is one example of an intervention.
Going up and saying, you threw that wrapper on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what word it would be, but a direct intervention or something.
Right. Yeah, somebody having a conversation, you see the behavior and somebody intervenes. We talk about, interventions in the context of people who have addictions too, right? So it's the same kind of thing. Like there's different ways to intervene with somebody who is with addictive behavior. But one of which is that, kind of like, hey, let's have a conversation. You really need to stop, doing the thing you're doing, and you have a problem or whatever. That's far outside my area of expertise. So, but that's the idea of an intervention. And so, yeah, and the signage is a great one. And so I actually have a couple slides. You guys already laid out these possible interventions. And so, but measuring the effectiveness is important. And sometimes that can be done fairly directly, but a lot of times, you have to get a bigger sample size. And, just because it worked one time doesn't mean it's, you might just have been lucky, right? So measurement and figuring out, that's kind of figuring out how are we going to determine whether this is going to work. So, okay. Changes to infrastructure. And this is a little bit outside the scope of Leave No Trace, right? Because we're talking about decisions that an individual makes. Am I going to stay on the trail? Am I going to build a big fire? Am I going to use a backpacking stove? Am I going to pick up the trash or throw the trash on the ground, right? But there are things that a camp ranger or a land manager can do that to the kind of infrastructure, right, of the place that help encourage a certain behavior, right? And or that help to reduce impacts. And so I imagine some of you have seen steps like that. That's a lot of work to build those steps. I would say. Did you work on the Bear Mountain Project at all? Yeah. So yeah, Susie's from northern New Jersey and works at the New York, New Jersey Trail, or not work, but you volunteer with and anyway, Bear Mountain is where the busiest place on the Appalachian Trail, basically. And they built like 2,000 feet of stone steps like that. Yeah, it took, 4 years or something, 6 years? It was a long time.
But if you look at what was there before, it was an extreme example of social tools.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular section of the AT was actually the very first section
Right.
of the AT that opened. So you had just trails going every which way.
Right. And so one place got abused so much that everybody started walking a different way, and then they got abused, and nowhere had a place to recover, and thousands of people are walking up and down this every year. So anyway, that's one example, and that's a pretty extreme example of hardening that surface. And there's lots of others. The Order of the Arrow up in the Boundary Waters, where they're doing portage trails. If you've ever gone up there before they rehabilitated and created these portage trails, you're walking through beaver muck up that's like this deep. But now they build these paths that are hardened right, and it both makes a better experience for the person who's going there, but it also really protects that place. And then this, I couldn't find a better picture, and I'm sure I have one somewhere in my billion Leave No Trace pictures. But anyway, this is another example, right? And we've seen those, right? The fixed fire rings. When we make the stone ones, and we have these in our camps, I've seen them all over the place, and then they get a little bigger, and then the troop comes in, and they're like a bigger troop, so they need to spread the stones out a little bit more so that everybody can cook their foil meals. And that fire ring just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So then we're gonna roast the side of beef in there, it's 14 feet across. So these ones are kind of beat up, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So you're creating a place that's clear where the fire is supposed to go, and really signals like you're not supposed to build a fire bigger than is going to fit in this fire ring. So anyway, and there's many other examples of that, things we can do with our trails, campsites, et cetera, with the infrastructure and land managers. Okay, so this is one that didn't come up, but something we talk about a lot within our BSA Leave No Trace community, right? Is how do we do training? And there's just, a couple of the examples of training, but lots of other the different courses and all the stuff that Susie has. I guess you're going to talk tomorrow about that stuff, right? That's tomorrow morning, yeah. We talked about it some already, but we'll talk about it some more. And just a photo, this is the classic trash timeline. So training is one intervention. And what are ways we can measure the effectiveness of our training?
Monitor the post-training behaviors.
Mm-hmm. What? Say that again?
What kind of results are we getting?
Yeah. And that, as we know, that can be kind of hard, though, too, right? Circling back with people, and a lot of our, in Scouts, a lot of our post-monitoring of behavior is not about, does the person actually change, are they picking up their trash and building smaller fires? We're saying, you completed this level 2 instructor course, are you going out and teaching other people? So it's kind of the right thing, and hopefully if they're going out and teaching other people, they're actually also setting a good example and actually doing the behavior too. But training is another example of intervention. Okay, and then here, this is, basically a kind of direct conversation. It can take many forms, and that could be just a conversation. We don't. I guess Leave No Trace has stepped away from this now, but what do you? Mark is shaking his head. You know what I'm talking about?
Authority of the resource.
Authority of the resource. Do people remember authority of the resource? So, does someone give a quick explanation of authority of the resource?
So an authority of the resources, you're saying, you have this resource, and if we abuse this resource, we won't have this resource. Versus the authority of the law that says, you threw garbage, I'm going to give you a ticket.
Right.
But you're trying to convince or change their way of thinking to match the ethics.
Yeah, exactly, right. And now I think my understanding is that the agency personnel are continuing to use that, but Leave No Trace has recommended that, folks like us, kind of the volunteers, don't use authority of the resource as much because we actually don't have the authority of the agency. If I go and talk to somebody, I talk to Mike and be like, Mike, I noticed your dog is chasing the squirrels all over the place, and that kind of engagement. If I'm a national park ranger and I can write you a ticket for leaving your dog off the leash, that's one thing. But anyway, but I just wanted to bring that in. But that's authority of the resource would be an intervention in this kind of category, but just not. Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
But on the other hand, if we're scout leaders and it's our scouts, we do have authority, and instead of just bang, 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 can't do this, can't do this, explaining the important, all these rules have a really important reason behind them that's tied down to the resource. So
Yes, and the science, right? The science, going back to this, yeah.
So to the extent we can still use those concepts of explaining the important why behind it, people are much more likely to go along with it. And so we need something to fill that gap because it's still a really
Yeah. I think the technique is valid, and I kind of wonder kind of what direction we might choose to go with that. Yeah, Susie, go ahead. Yeah.
I can tell you that Leave No Trace, when they do revise the Master Educator book that they have for sale.
The level 2
the
instructor
level
book. Yeah.
2,
Yes.
But it's still called
Master Educator Handbook. Yes.
In their catalog, that will come out.
Right. That's my understanding.
So
Yeah.
that's why it's sort of in
Yeah.
limbo, and
Right.
it's totally out in level 1.
Right.
as of now.
Right.
But to Mark's point, it is a good technique because you are teaching the law.
Yeah.
People
Right.
are more likely to not do something if they understand.
Yes. In certain contexts, like you said, you're the scoutmaster of a troop that's out camping, or you're the camp master or the camp ranger and the troop is camping there. You do have some authority. It's not like you're a random person.
going up to random strangers and trying to straighten them out.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And beating them up with Leave No Trace.
Right. As with many things, it depends, right? Yeah, go
I
ahead.
have an example of this.
Yeah.
A buddy of mine's a big hiker, and he takes his dog and it's on the leash, and he walks up and down the trails in the San Dimas, and he comes across other people whose dogs are running loose, and comes running up to his dog and runs at him, and he tries to talk to the owners. Hey, you're really supposed to have your dog on the leash, and that. And he said one owner basically kind of gave him the finger, and that frustrated him enough that he actually went to the force, to
The actual authority of the agency.
that area and said, you gotta do something. You can't. You say you can't have dogs running, but people have these dogs running, and how do I know that dog's not going to attack me?
Right.
I got a dog.
Or attack your dog or whatever. Right. Yep.
But,
Sure. Yep.
So he kind of did the
Right.
authority of the resource,
Right.
but
Yep.
but he ended up having to go to the authority.
Yeah. And I think this comes to this question of effectiveness, right? And if you're a scientist or a researcher and trying to design an experiment or observe behavior, trying to observe, okay, there's 100 times that are, or 500 times that you see somebody trying to use the authority of the resource technique. Does it actually work to change the person's behavior or not? I think that would be a little hard to do because the authority of the resource interventions really aren't typically scheduled. It's not, you follow people around and, so that would be a difficult experiment to actually do. And that's actually why a lot of these human dimensions experiments are kind of hard, Things like, again, how long does it take a styrofoam cup to decompose? The styrofoam, you can count them. There's like, okay, we got 10 styrofoam cups, and there are these different environments, and this is moist, and this is dry, and da-da-da-da-da, right? But people's behavior is pretty complicated and hard to predict and hard to measure, so. Yeah, go ahead. What did you say, Mark?
It's squishy. It's a real soft science.
Yeah. Well, but it's very important, right? Because if we only measure all the ecological impacts, but we still don't figure out how to actually change people's behavior, then we're kind of in trouble, right? So these, yeah, kind of authority, the resource kinds of conversations, or just the, hey, whatever. But teachable moments is another opportunity that would kind of, to me, fits kind of under this umbrella. And then just setting a positive example. People, if somebody doesn't know what to do, but they see, oh, you're an experienced outdoor person, and you seem to know what you're doing, so I'm just going to kind of do the same thing you're doing, right? You're not cutting the switchback. You're following. You're setting a good example, right? Rather than cutting the switchback. So this is actually a question for folks. I know we have forest rangers, park rangers, the agency interpretive staff is in lots of places. There's usually not as many as they need, but they're all over the place. But I live in Massachusetts now. I'm kind of a northeast person, and so ridge runners and see New Jersey, right, Appalachian Trail, right? But ridge runners and then summit stewards, is that a thing in Colorado or?
Winter Wilderness Volunteers is a huge organization in northern Colorado that goes out and meets people, and they do invasive species control. There's volunteer organizations like that.
And so, but this is specifically where they're engaging people on leave no trace behavior, and also maybe picking up trash and
Different teams. Some teams are just out there meeting people, and other teams are.
Yep. So these things exist. So maybe I'll follow up with you. We can add some more down there. But I put a few examples that I'm familiar with. The Appalachian Trail. These people, and some of them are paid. They go up and hike back and forth a section of the Appalachian Trail all summer. Here's my 40 miles, and I'm just going to walk back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and talk to hikers and check out the shelters and meet people and talk to them about their experience, but also the leave no trace and environmental behavior. And then Summit Stewards is another one. And up our way, the Adirondack High Peaks and the White Mountains are two places where they're pretty prominent because there's really heavy use, and frequently some of that heavy use is coming from visitors who are not they're not as familiar with how leave no trace behavior. So anyway, this is another type of intervention, and this one, if you actually have somebody who's the intervener, the park interpretive staff or the ridge runner, then it's a little easier to count. Like I spoke with 96 hikers today, and I was observing out of the 96, 40 of them were doing this, and then I talked to them and they said, oh yeah, I agree, I'll do this differently, and so you could kind of start to create a research project to measure that. And that's an example of the kind of things and the kind of research that would be done in this area. And then here we go. Here's another one that Mark mentioned, signs, because we definitely do not have as many people to go out and talk to people about leave no trace. How many traveling teams do we have now? Is it just 3 traveling teams for the whole U.S., right? That's a lot of territory and a lot of trails and a lot of parks and a lot of national forests and and if you take and even I don't know right now, but the Catskill Park in New York State is 200 and some thousand acres, and there's something like 3 rangers, so and they're always trying to get more, and maybe they'll have a couple seasonal people and things like that. But there's just no feasible way that they can cover all of the trails. And this is within, 50 miles of New York City and northern New Jersey, millions of people. So there's no way that they can talk to everybody. So signs are a useful intervention. And there's some examples. Some of them, and this is another thing about figuring out what signs actually work, right? And you've all seen, I'm sure, lots of examples of signs. This is one that I just found in my PowerPoint. and they put all the regulations of the Adirondack High Peak Wilderness Area. How many people stop and read every one of those regulations? Yeah, because that's actually, you probably have already walked like 2.5 miles through the non-wilderness area on a trail to get to the sign that says you're entering the wilderness area. So they're already tired and they have another 4 miles to walk to get to their campsite. So they're going to maybe sign in at the sign-in box, but they're probably not going to read all the regulations. But some other classic signs. What do you think about this one? Scott, kind of, our Marshall, somebody was talking about this earlier, right? Yeah, the yielding, the safety moment, right, yeah, yielding. But do you think people understand that sign?
No, because they're like, this is this loop, like, they don't really, which way do I go?
Yeah, I think it is a common sign. We've seen those in a lot of places. And maybe people understand it, but maybe the people who are following what it means are the ones who already understood it. So does it actually change behavior? But that could be, again, you design an experiment and conduct research where, this sign is there, somebody stays there and watches as people go by. Do they look at the sign, or do they just walk past it, or ride their horse past it, or ride their bike past it? And then somebody else is, a half a mile down the trail, and do you see the mountain bikes like speeding past and running over the hikers, or do they actually yield? So, and then I think humor is an interesting approach too, right? This is one I just saw in a local park somewhere. I have a lot of pictures of signs in my computer here. So it says City Code Section 1037. Oh, over here. Yeah, City of Keene, New Hampshire. So anyway, yeah, kind of. So like humor. Like, is that, there's, because you could contrast this to like another sign that would say, pick up your dog's poop, right? Or the ones with the small print regulations about dog poop, and it's like 2 paragraphs of text on the sign, which nobody's going to read. But maybe if people see that and they're like, oh, that's kind of funny, but they remember it and they actually do it. So maybe that's the most effective. And so anyway, these, again, different strategies. So here's a scouting example, a sign. How many of you have been to the summit before in West Virginia? Yep, some, yep. And so it's West Virginia, so that means there's lots of hills. There's hardly any level spots. The only level spots are the ones that they strip mined and completely leveled, right? But there's lots of slopes all over the place. And when we went there in 2013, and then we went back, been there a few times, but I noticed that especially in 2013, the first big jamboree, it opened, brought whatever it was, 30,000 scouts and something like that. And so they had spent, a couple years building these, and that's what this is down here. They built these, they call them trails, but they're really roads. They're, kind of gravel roads, 10 feet wide. But they have these switchbacks. They go up and down. So this is sloping up this way, and it goes over here, switches back, and comes back around at the top of this hill. And so, what do you think happened when you brought 30,000 scouts, and and it was all open like this too, no trees. It was really clear. You're up there at the top, and this is probably, 30 feet down or 35 feet, something like that. But you look down, and that road is right down there. And it's 94 degrees out, and the humidity is really high. And do you take those? Yeah. Because those roads were really designed for vehicles to also be able to, a grade that they could go up, make the turn, and whatever. So anyway, lots and lots of this. We saw this all over the place. But then we talked to the summit people, and we're like, hey, this whole leave no trace thing, and we've been teaching scouts about it for a while, and maybe we could try to use something to say, hey, maybe if you practice, leave no trace. And so they actually then, so these signs weren't there in 2013. But then gradually over the next few years, we've been putting them up. So in 2017, Jamboree and other, in between, the summer camp and all the other stuff they do there. But these signs started to appear. And I will confess that I did not do a research study to determine how many scouts, looked at the sign and whether they cut the switchback or not and all that. But it certainly, I would say anecdotally to me, these signs seem to be working to some extent. There are still places, and it'd be interesting, and maybe, if you have any, aspiring college students who love Leave No Trace and want to do a research experiment, they can go to the summit and, check this out. Because there are places where there are switchbacks like this and they still cut up and down because there's no sign. Or there's places there's a sign and they still do it, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of figuring all that out would be pretty interesting. But I just wanted to bring a Scout-specific example in. So a couple more. It's probably hard for you to read that little sign up there. But so I blew it up for you. It says, "No trash, please." This is the Appalachian Trail in Connecticut. And it's actually, you can't really see too much, but there's like an old woods road that ends about right here. These rocks are kind of at the end of it, blocking it off. But do you think the "No trash, please" sign? There's the Appalachian Trail blaze on this tree. It hasn't been refreshed for a while, you can see. But is that "No trash, please" sign very effective? Maybe in general, but at least one person clearly did not get the message.
They did, but they...
Or they got the message and they just ignored it. Right. And that goes to this behavior, right? Is, what's effective, and if somebody is going to participate in illegal behavior, putting up a sign in the middle of the woods where nobody's going to see them probably isn't going to stop them. So let me see, almost done. Citizen science. I'm interested actually in your thought on this too, and like Leave No Trace citizen science projects and kind of how they're going and the level of participation. So, but let's talk about that. Do people know what we're talking about when I say citizen science? There's these other kind of names for it. There's a little sensitivity around calling it citizen science because that's like, I'm somebody who's an immigrant and I live in a place and I hike there, but I'm not a US citizen, so does that mean I can't do the science, I can't like enjoy the birds or whatever. But so anyway, and of course something I've seen is like academics always want to invent like slightly different terms for things because that way you can get your paper published, it's like, oh, I invented this new thing, so publish my paper. But anyway, there's a bunch of different names for it. It's basically the same idea that public is engaging in kind of data collection or observations, helping either the land manager or the scientific community, and then and kind of watching those impacts. And so here are a couple of examples down here. You can't really probably see the web links very well, but have any of you used that EDD maps? It's for invasive species. So if you're a person who like pays attention to invasive species and you're out walking through the forest and you see some, garlic mustard or what is it, autumn olive or whatever it is out here, you can, go on your phone and you do the, you go to the website and you click the little map and like I'm right here and this invasive species was found here, and you can even add a little bit of characterization around it of, how much you saw, and is it like a complete infestation or is it just starting? And for the land managers who are trying to figure out like what's our strategy going to be to prevent or reduce invasive species, it helps to know that. Or if you're in Ohio and this in particular invasive species never seen before, you can and then suddenly it pops up, then somebody can go and try to stop it, right? And then the bird count, the big bird count happens in February is another example. So there's types of citizen science. I don't know what, I can't, the clock is like glare. Am I out of time, or I'm almost out of time? I'm out of time, okay. So the end, this is just the summary slide. You get these three kind of categories of science happening with Leaving to Trace. And thanks for being here, and happy to talk more about this. I care about this stuff and happy to geek out on it. So thanks.
Thank you, Dave.
Yep.